Ooh, it's nighttime. You know what that means. Discourse analysis. I don't even know what discourse analysis is. It just sounds like what I'm doing. So there's this video by one of my favorite YouTubers, Angela Collier, and in it she breaks down the ridiculousness of an interview with Zoom CEO in which he basically claims that at some point in the future, or down the stack as he likes to say, you as the manager or employee of a company will have this AI shadow essentially that can like go to meetings for you. And it's hilarious because obviously that's not how meetings work. Like, even if you did have this second little AI version of yourself that could attend meetings, if a meeting happened and you weren't there for it, you wouldn't know what the fuck is going on. Until presumably your AI shadow bot sent you an AI generated summary of the entire meeting. And look, forget it. The point is, AI is being either proposed or implemented in so many places where it just shouldn't be. And in case you've been living under a rock, one of those places is the job market. And no, I don't mean that AI is going to take all of our jobs, although maybe that's for another video. What I'm talking about is Upwork and LinkedIn. Oh yeah, the job finding and getting market. It is not a pretty sight. So one of the things that we're told about the implementation of AI is that it will make things more efficient. And how do we know that? Well, because people get laid off, because some people will be able to do more things in less time. It will just lead to this increase in efficiency of human activity. But if you've been online recently, you know that Upwork and LinkedIn are a fucking dumpster fire. Why? Because jobs are so competitive that applicants submit their resume to hundreds of jobs. And how are they going to do that? Using AI, of course. And platforms like Upwork make it so easy. It's literally a bright green button right there on the text editor for your cover letter. Now, keep this button in mind because I'm going to come back to it in a minute. On the other side, you have the hiring manager who is now overwhelmed by thousands of applicants if they didn't already know who they were going to go with before they opened the job to everyone, which also happens. Now, half of what this hiring manager receives is primo AI slop, served up straight from the fucking trough. What does the savvy hiring manager do? Well, they implement their little new AI program, makes you hire 10 times faster, gets you more done in less time. It's more efficient, okay? And then applicants find out that this is going on, so they use AI to stuff their resume with keywords, and I think you see where the vicious cycle is going. So the entire selling point of AI is that it's going to make stuff more efficient, but we end up in this weird situation where individually it feels like that's true, but as a whole, the system is trash. It's trash. The system is trash. There's a big point I want to take from this, and that is that in order to call something more efficient, you have to do two things. One, you have to assign a value that you're going to measure. What is more efficient? How is efficiency defined? There are many different ways to analyze one system, but to say that that system is more efficient, you have to first define what's important to you. What aspect of that system are you looking to make more efficient? Now, today, what's efficient is basically what's profitable. And sometimes the most efficient thing is also the most profitable thing. But that's not always true. Like, remember that little green Upwork button? The reason this button exists is not because it makes it easier for any of Upwork's users to connect with employers or employees. It's there because AI is a huge buzzword, and if your platform doesn't incorporate it at every turn, you're dead in the water, caught with your pants down. Investors gone. The button doesn't exist because it's efficient. It exists because it's profitable, and those aren't the same thing. Oh my god, it's already gone. This is going to be a long video. The second thing you have to do in order to make the claim that a system is more efficient is you have to narrow the scope of what you're saying is efficient within that system. This kind of overlaps with the first point, but it's distinct. What I mean by this is that on Upwork, an individual is disadvantaged if they don't use the new function. And so within the existing system, the individual hiring manager or job applicant feels compelled to use this technology because it will lead to a more efficient experience. But that's only within a narrow slice of the pie, because as we already saw, this AI function on Upwork and LinkedIn isn't leading to better or easier or more reliable connections between hiring managers and job applicants. It's actually having the complete opposite effect. And so in order to claim that AI is making things more efficient, you have to set a parameter or a value, which in this case is just profit. And then the second thing you have to do is you have to zoom in your scope, in this case to the individual user. And so the problem is, and I said this in my freedom video, but the same thing is true here. Efficiency is not just a dial you can turn. Unfortunately, you cannot just crank that shit to 11, because we're not talking about a motorcycle or a small controlled system. We're talking about humans on Earth. We are extraordinarily complex, and we have wants and needs and desires, and half the time we don't even understand what's going on. And so when you change one component of the system, sometimes that has downstream effects on the rest of the system. And when you're only measuring one part, that rest is easy to miss. To recap, there are two steps to make the claim that something is efficient. One, assign a value. We have to assign a value in order to produce a measurement. We have to define what we care about measuring. You can't measure all aspects of our world. You have to pick one, sweetie. Usually we do it with two-dimensional graphs with an X and a Y axis, because if you add any more, no one is going to know what the fuck you're talking about. But we all know that human beings in all of our fallible, beautiful complexities cannot be represented by simple two-dimensional graphs. And that's why we have number 2. Reduce your scope. We have to reduce our scope in order to claim that something is more efficient, because as we just saw, you can make a system more efficient for individual components without the net result being a more efficient system. So we have to pick a portion of the system to analyze, set it aside, and declare that that aspect of the system is working more efficiently. And where I'm going with all of this is that you'll hear a lot of people talking about humans are better off than we used to be. They'll show you graphs, and they'll tell you that because of this or that, we are less violent and we're living better than we used to be. And what I want to suggest is that in order to make these kinds of claims, you have to do two things. 1, assign a value to measure, and 2, reduce the scope of your measurement. And that's going to create some issues. Twice the video, twice the beer. All right, part 2. Listen up. There's going to be a lot of people on TED Talks and morning TV, and their name might be Steven Pinker, and they are going to try to convince you that humans are better off than we used to be. And they're going to throw a lot of graphs at you, and they're going to hit you with a lot of numbers. And these people might say, yeah, things are bad, but they've been worse, and they're also getting better. And then there's this other group of people that look at things like exploitation or mental health indicators or that huge fucking pile of garbage in the middle of the ocean and say, well, I don't really think so. I think things are getting worse. And I hate to be the centrist in the room, but they're both right. Look, the baseline standard of living can be higher than it's ever been, and inequality can also be higher than it's ever been. These can be true at the same time. It can also be true that human lifespan is longer than it's ever been, at the same time that our risk of extinction as a species is higher than it's ever been. I feel like I'm bursting a bubble here, but these are not mutually exclusive categories. So there you go. I did it. You can stop having these fights. Everyone can go home and let's have a good night's sleep. Except for that, this is where the real debate starts. I just realized my mic has been a shaking and a quaking on my desk, but there's no going back, so sorry about that. So you have the system at hand, which is Earth. It is an ecosystem, and it has many species. I mean, it is an incomprehensible network of many different kinds of plants and animals and energy systems. And what we do is we take one tiny little sliver of this immense ecosystem, and that sliver is humans. And then, out of all of the aspects of identity and place and interdependence and belonging and reciprocity and sexuality that make us human, we take 1 or 2 or 5 parameters and we just fucking crank them. And I think the parameter that is characteristic of this is longevity. And longevity is just one dimension of a very complex being that coexists with this immense ecosystem of other beings. And then you stick it on a graph and you say, whoa, look at us, look at humans, confetti, boing, 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 we're doing better than ever, woo! And then your fucking commute is over and Steven Pinker goes back in your pocket. And what everyone else is observing in these longevity statistics is, look, that's not how ecosystems work. That's not how evolution works, because we live in a highly interdependent system of animals and different forms of consciousness, none of which really take priority over one another. Like, we have food chains and we can talk about humans or sharks at the top of the food chain as compared to algae or sunflowers or hummingbirds. But the reality is that all of these systems coexist with and rely on each other. And so measuring the parameters of success of one of these beings doesn't give us that much information about the health of the system overall. That's why, in order to make the claim that humans are better than we've ever been, we have to place an extraordinary value on human life at the cost of the very environment that we live in. And furthermore, we have to narrow the scope of that environment to only include one species, us. And overall, it's pretty obvious what's happening in this debate between longevity and happiness. It's like, look, we're living a long-ass time, but also the third leading cause of death between 14 and 18-year-olds is suicide behind accidents and homicide. And everyone despises their job and their commute, which gives them a half hour to listen to Steven Pinker. And so we're sick, we're ill, everyone hates themselves and each other, but at least we have AC and TV and Lunchables and Lay's chips and polio vaccines, so just shut your trap. Look, this is a philosophical debate that I'm really not interested in, like, between longevity and happiness. If there's anything I hate, it's a good happiness study. I fucking hate happiness studies. I am not interested in this. But, you know, the violence, that is an interesting one to me because, Steven, I don't know if you're a violent guy, but violence can take many forms, and if you're interested in the more structural aspect, you might like this German guy who theorizes about societies in which the labor and life force of the masses is appropriated by very few, and all within the confines of the legal system. And this system doesn't really appear to rely on violence, but then again, violence isn't just clubbing a Neanderthal for dinner. We exist within very complex social networks that can take many forms and which can exploit and subject and oppress people on many different and often invisible levels. And there's this book I really like that brings these perspectives into conversation with one another, and that's Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And in it, Quinn points out that if we saw the same graphs that we do for human population with something like beavers or any other species, we would be incredibly concerned. We would not say, wow, what a great success, what a marker of progress this is. No, because we understand that when one part of an ecosystem goes like way out of whack, that has effects on the rest of the system in which that component exists. In other words, if the statistics that Steven Pinker presents were presented for any other category of animal on Earth, we wouldn't really be celebrating. It wouldn't be seen in this light of like progress. The thing is, this book pissed a lot of people off because they said, okay, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Criticism, I see that you think we have too many people on the planet, but what are you suggesting? Like eugenics or genocide? Like, what's going on here? But this is the cliffhanger of the book that I actually love because most people aren't considering the relationship between these two perspectives, between human longevity on the one hand and carbon emissions on the other, between the decrease in interpersonal violence and the increase in suicide rates. These are not figures that are at the forefront of most people's minds. Quinn's implication is that if they were, the world would be a very different place. Daniel Quinn's goal is not to propose a global solution to these problems, it's to raise consciousness about the fact that there is an incredibly rich dialogue to be had between these different perspectives. Now, I have my own perspective, which I will share a little bit because I feel like this video would be incomplete if I didn't. And to put it simply, I basically think we live in a longevity bubble. Like, you have to understand that all of these things that we consider markers of human progress came at an enormous cost, not only in terms of the labor and exploitation that it took on a global level to achieve these advances, but the resulting psychological burden of trying to come to terms with, on the one hand, unprecedented individual longevity and total extinction on the other. And I don't think that this longevity slash population bubble exists because of any natural or philosophical law that states that the Earth does not have the capacity to support 9 billion people. I think by all metrics, it absolutely does. But we have to understand that the challenges we're facing are not technological in nature, they're social and political. It's not about needing to produce the adequate number of calories for people on Earth. We already overshoot by far the number of calories needed to feed the entire global population. It's just that the way those calories are distributed is insanely unequal. And I think what Daniel Quinn points out is that there's not an easy solution to these problems. His approach was simply to raise consciousness about the fact that there's a dialogue to be had between these different positions. Because ultimately, they're both true. And if we want to think about a future for humans that doesn't involve extinction, we're going to have to juggle the fact that we've achieved certain short-term gains at an extremely unsustainable cost. And furthermore, that those gains are only made within two conceits. First, the placement of a very particular value on human life and particular aspects of human life. And second, the reduction of scope of our entire Earth system to one very small sliver of that system. That's how we arrive at the conclusion that these gains have even been made in the first place. What do we do? That is precisely the question that Quinn leaves us with, and that I would like to leave you guys with. How do we even process this confrontation between a highly technological and highly advanced, highly, quote, efficient society and one that's at the same time teetering on the verge of extinction. It's like not something that makes sense, right? It's something we have to figure out together.